Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the start of a very special Art Deco inspired series. We're going to be creating hand-lettered alphabets and patterns together, but the reason that it's extra special and just different than our usual series is for a couple of reasons, but 3 reasons actually. So the first is that 100 years have passed since F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby was published. That also coincides, if you're watching this live, with our celebration of 100 years of Montblanc's iconic writing instrument, the Meisterstück, this year. Meisterstück, if you didn't know, means masterpiece in German. And so this new celebration, this new collection that I have with me here today is to honor this literary masterpiece. And Montblanc, in order to honor that, has created a new collection of great character writing instruments. So I have one today. You're going to see me using it throughout the class as an homage to J. Gatsby. I'm going to talk a lot about its features and things like that. But just right off the bat, because I just received this and I'm so excited to show it to you, it has the JG monogram. Hopefully you can see that here. You have red and blue down at the bottom of the barrel as an homage to the American dream. And then this pattern here on the barrel of the writing instrument signifies kind of the lights and the glamour of New York City. And then here, the clip is to symbolize or to be reminiscent of a money clip. Super fun. And obviously you're going to see the nib here in a moment as well. So back to today, we are going to be learning a bold hand lettering alphabet style inspired by sort of the printmaking designs of the Roaring 20s. Next time, we're going to be creating simple geometric patterns together. So for today, just make sure you have your workbook printed. Okay, so we have our workbook, and now I want to talk about materials. So first page of our workbook here is kind of a brief history of Art Deco versus another movement called Art Nouveau. So we have Deco here in a visual on the right, and then Nouveau here on the left. So unlike Art Nouveau, which is really inspired by nature and organic forms that you can see here, the Art Deco style, and again, you can see some of the patterns on either side of my workbook here, is really an embracing of the modern age and industrialization. And what that meant for design was that you got to see a lot more sharp angles and bold lines and geometric shapes. And when you're looking at, architecture, you see a lot of shiny, polished materials. So a lot of the words that I just said, I bolded here in this paragraph. So you have bold lines, geometric shapes, symmetry, sharp angles, polished materials, because they matter for our lesson today. So even though Art Deco was a popular, architectural design, if you think about the Chrysler Building as an example in New York City, it also influenced the fonts and scripts used in the 1920s as well. So one word that we'll talk about on the next page a lot, but it's worth adding to sort of this bolded list here, is the word contrast. So I just want everybody to grab your favorite writing instrument here, and we're going to write contrast. I just love how this writes. It's super heavy in my hand, just for something different. And this is a fine nib for anybody wondering here. This is an F, a fine nib. So we want to add the word contrast here. So there's this contrast in Art Deco design, whether we're looking at architecture or fonts and lettering, is there's this contrast between thin and thick lines, between round and angular shapes, a lot of juxtaposition. So since we're all writing aficionados here, we're going to be exploring some of those different script styles. But it's important to note that unlike something, let's say copperplate calligraphy or other traditional scripts, there actually isn't one singular, let's say, holy grail Art Deco font. Instead, the characteristics that I just mentioned that are bolded here, so all of these, bolded terms are what have inspired hundreds of variations of Art Deco inspired scripts over the years. So we're going to be focusing on bold hand lettering today. So you can see across the top, we're going to be focusing on bold hand lettering today. But this is just a few other examples of Art Deco inspired fonts here today. And you're actually going to be learning some of the thinner, less bold fonts and scripts with Chantel in another class as well. So this is very exciting because you're going to be able to delve into 3 different alphabet styles within the Art Deco series. Okay, so I'm going to just give you an example of how, again, when we're working with the Art Deco inspired fonts, all we're trying to do is be able to achieve sort of that angular shape. So I just want you to start drawing this shape. Doesn't matter if you have the same spacing yet. We're just trying to get a feel for how we can use grid paper to get those straight lines. And after we finish up this exercise here, I am going to check in on the Q&A. But again, you're using grid paper to just sort of help you get as straight of a line as possible. And really, I feel like I have to get kind of super close up in here, but we're just getting warmed up. We're not creating anything intentional right now. Grid paper is also going to help with symmetry. And so when we are looking at Art Deco alphabets, especially the bold variety, we want the thickness of, let's say, the downstroke on the U here to be similar to the thickness on the downstroke of the P. And the way that you can use grid paper to help you achieve that is by just counting the number of squares each time you are adding thickness to a letter. And so let's say we're choosing 2 squares. We can create a box with straight lines. And now we know that anytime we're adding thickness to our letters, we're using 2 squares to make sure that all of our thicknesses are the same width. Does that make sense? So you could also choose, say, 3, and it would look a little bit different. Or you could stick with 1. But you can imagine if we weren't using our grid paper, then let's say we start getting into actually adding some thickness to our letters here, and you weren't using grid paper, you might end up with some letters that have a thickness that's about this wide, some letters that are super wide, some letters that are sort of in between, and that's not what we want. So we want as much as we can to create some consistency, and that's why I find grid paper super, super helpful. So we're going to be doing something similar here as faux calligraphy, and I'm going to show you a few examples of my writing instruments and how this will look with a little bit more effort with a fine nib, less effort if you're using a flexible or a curved, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be creating a box similar to what you did up here, and I'm just going to start with 1 square across and 4 squares down just so that you can see it. So I've created my box, and again, I'm using a fine nib, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily for the filling in the thicker parts of your alphabet, but I just want to show you that no matter what writing instrument you're using at home, this can absolutely work for you. And you're simply just going to fill that in with your fountain pen ink. If you're using something like a roller ball or a ballpoint, this is going to be a little bit more tedious because I think that's the benefit of using a fountain pen is that the ink just flows so smoothly and nicely from the nib. And so if you can use a fountain pen for Art Deco lettering, I would highly, highly recommend it. So that's with your fine nib. And we're just simply filling that in. Next, I'm going to use my bespoke nib, again, that I had made in Hamburg, Germany last year. This is a very special, precious heirloom to me. And again, I'm just going to do 1 square across, 4 squares down. But you can already see, just laying down that box stroke, that I already get a thicker line. So it's going to be a lot easier and faster for me to fill in that thicker stroke. So that's italic. Now I want to show you the curved. So what's really cool about the curved nib is you can actually use the nib at any angle, which is really, really neat. So if you want that nice thin line, we can actually flip it upside down. So I'm flipping it upside down and I get a nice thin line. But then when I'm using the nib at my regular angle, that was super fast to fill in. And you can see as I'm writing the letter C, how much thicker that ink distribution is. So this would be something that would be quite versatile, I would say, using a curved nib if you don't have something like a broad nib on hand, because I know that's more of a specific choice for those of us that don't have a broad. Next, I'm going to be using the flex nib. So this is my favorite writing instrument for calligraphy, but I think it is fun to show you new ways of using it. So if those of you who follow me on Instagram might have seen that I just launched my custom ornaments, and I use this exact flex nib to draw pet portraits. I use it to draw my house portraits. I actually love drawing with my flex nib because you can get this nice thin line when you use light pressure, but as soon as you apply pressure to the nib, the tines open up and you get a thicker stroke. So with these other nibs, it doesn't matter if you're applying light pressure or heavy pressure, you get the same line width. With the flex nib, if you apply pressure moving down, you get a thicker stroke. So now I'm going to write the F pressing down on that downstroke. Let me bring it up here so you can see. I'm just going to write the word flex in modern calligraphy, and that way you can just see what this looks like. So this is thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thick, thin. So I just love, love, love the versatility of the flex nib. So then now we're going to go down to the bottom of the page here. And what we know is that one of the defining characteristics of Art Deco lettering is contrast, right? And in most alphabets, you're going to see perfect circles juxtaposed with super thin letters like I and T. So this is very specific to Art Deco inspired lettering, okay? So not usually, if you were looking at like a printed alphabet, for example, you would always kind of want the width of your letters to be the same size. So again, I'm looking at the cover of the Great Gatsby here. You can see a lot of characteristics of this title that would not appear in a typical alphabet. So I want to kind of touch on that a little bit with an example. So I'm going to look at number 6 in our book here. So similar to what we're doing today, but what do you notice about the scale of some of these letters? So I'm looking at the B as an example, and it looks quite like the actual width of the letter is a lot thinner than the width of the D. And then look at the width of that O juxtaposed with the width of this N. So again, in most Art Deco alphabets, you're going to see perfect circles. So this would be a perfect circle just with the end chopped off because it's a C. Same with this G. I want you to envision that's a perfect circle, perfect circle, perfect circle, perfect circle. And even in some alphabets, the D will get almost extended into that perfect circle shape. The P will get extended out into that perfect circle. And so it's really important when you're hand lettering to be able to draw a circle. And so I want to show you a really easy way of doing that with our pencil down here. So I've given you some examples of just some of those letters that are absolute perfect circles. Again, we are hand lettering, so we're not going to be absolutely perfect, but we're going to use our grid paper to help us a little bit here. So if you were using your grid, so we're using our grid here, this perfect circle in a lot of Art Deco alphabets would be double the size of the thin letters. So we're using 1, 2, 3, 4 squares of space here. And some of your thinner letters might actually only be 2 squares of space. Just to give you an example of making sure that you're juxtaposing some of the thin letters next to the thick letters. Again, we're going to talk about how to draw that perfect circle now. So I'm going to use 1, 2, 3, 4 squares down, 4 squares across the top. 1, 2, 3. I'm using my pencil here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just going to use a square to help guide us as we draw this circle. So the middle of this square is 2 squares down. Okay. And just drawing a light pencil mark here just to show us. So I've counted 4 squares across, 4 squares down. And now I'm going to start on the outer edge here and draw up into the second square and down as we get into the fourth square. So that's the top, and then same thing at the bottom. And now I'm just going to round that out a little bit. Okay. And if I, let's say, only wanted 1 square width for my thick line, then I would draw that thickness here. But if you want, 1.5, then you could draw it halfway into the next line there. So now you could go ahead and use your writing instrument and trace that and add the line weight and fill it in. I'm just going to leave mine as pencil right now because we're just talking about, again, drawing that perfect circle. You're starting using the first 2 for the first hump, using the second 2 squares for the last, and then you're going to the bottom and doing the same thing. And then you're kind of just going to use your judgment to round it out, knowing that you're going to be inking this after, and so it doesn't have to be totally perfect. So just in your basic printing, or you can do calligraphy if you want, we're going to write the word crossbars. Crossbars. So this is like a typography term. If we're getting very technical here, you might have also heard the word bar or arms. But to keep it consistent and simple, the word crossbar is absolutely relevant for this discussion. And a crossbar just means connecting one stroke to another, okay? So connecting this stroke to this stroke, connecting this stroke to this stroke. That's a crossbar. And what you notice, so this gray line here would be our midway point. So in most printed alphabets, this R would only extend down to the midway point, and then the next stroke would connect from the middle. But with Art Deco scripts, like you saw in the title of The Great Gatsby, we have dramatically high and dramatically low crossbars. The ultimate goal is not that, they're always perfectly at this exact angle. Like you can see this H, for example, is a little bit, tiny bit below that high crossbar height. It technically should align with where the F and the E are. So as much as we possibly can, we want to make sure by counting the squares in our grid that our high crossbars are always at the same height and that our low crossbars are always at the same height, okay? But the goal is consistency. Consistency. The way that I would approach hand lettering this alphabet is by drawing the base shape first and then going in and adding your line width, okay? So we're going to draw the basic A shape first, and then we're going to add the line width and the crossbar. So again, I was using a fine nib here, so it's going to take me a little bit of time to fill in this. But let's do the next one with my curved. So again, I am drawing the base shape first, and I'm going to do my B a little bit higher crossbar, draw my box, and this is going to be super easy. So I'm turning my hand a little bit to the side here. I'm just going up, down, up, down, up. Again, we don't get as much of a juxtaposition as we did using the fine nib and filling that in. So I actually prefer, aesthetically, I prefer this one. And you can see with my curved nib, I'm using the lightest, or the backwards. I'm using my nib backwards to get a thin line. And if I use it the right way, I get a thick line. So super interesting. So many different ways to do this. I just think it's super fun. See you again very, very soon. Thank you so much.